Back, back once again. We're back once again. Are you guys feeling the excitement? Feeling the excitement? If you're here, drop a comment in the chat. If you're here, drop a comment in the chat. Apologize for being so late. My phone battery was very low, so I was then trying to do this on desktop, and that was a real hassle. It was not straightforward. I can put the glasses on. Let me put the glasses on again. It's good for my eyes. I guess I should do it. Is that better? All right. All right. But yeah, so I was charging the phone and then, yeah, just essentially seeing, well, maybe I can do it on the desktop. Maybe that's better. But it's just amazing how with the phone, it's so simple and straightforward to do one of these streams. It takes like 2 seconds. But if you actually try to do it on the desktop, it's like you got to get all these permissions, and um, it's just really elaborate, unnecessarily elaborate if you ask me. But that's the way the software works. Share the link on Twitter. Let's get some more people on. We've got some big stuff to talk about next few months. What's up, Rudy, my man? I know you guys probably wish this was earlier in the evening, but it's honestly been it's been a busy day. Non-stop client calls 5 to 9, show right after. So late CABAL hits different. True, very true. All right, we'll jump right in right now. So it's finally happening. It's finally happening. And look, we gotta say it. We gotta give ourselves some credit here. Did we not call this? Did we not call this? Just in the last month, maybe even a little bit longer, but certainly I know when we were doing these COVID cabals in July, we called this shit. First arrest was going to be Trump. Now, okay, he hasn't been arrested yet, but is anybody here seriously think that he's not going to get arrested? 8/8/22 on the Lionsgate portal, Trump gets arrested. Trump gets raided. And so let's talk about the raid. This is the big stuff. This is the big juice. It was not clear exactly why they were raiding him. Robert Barnes said that, I think a lot of people expected that maybe it would come from the January 6th Commission, and it may come from there too. Robert Barnes speculated that this was a deep state op, as in it wasn't directly from the Biden administration. It was from the deep state actors themselves, because he may have had some incriminating evidence on them. And one of the other things that Robert speculated on was that the reason that Trump didn't do declassification or pardoned Assange or Snowden was because he had he'd essentially that it was like an insurance policy. So he was going to keep all that documentation, and if they tried to do something, then he'd release it. Now, let's get to some of the facts here. The magistrate judge that signed off on the raid was Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer. So, very much involved with the swamp. So the question is sort of, were those the documents, or was it what has now been going around, which is that the FBI was looking for the nuclear codes? Now, longtime followers of the COVID cabal might find that very interesting, because what have I been fucking saying? What have I been saying for the last year and a half? What have I been saying for the last year and a half? ballistic missile defense, Cheyenne Mountain, has not signed off in the Biden presidency, and Biden does not have the codes. The deep state does not have the nuclear codes because Cheyenne Mountain has been locked up since March 15th, 2020, and ain't nobody getting in or out, and the control over it was transferred to Space Force. Okay. And the deal with nuclear weapons, what security clearance do you need to have? You need to have a Department of Energy Q class security clearance. Okay? So, that seems to lend a lot of credibility to the fact. Why would they care about Trump having the nuclear codes? Why would they care about Trump having the nuclear codes? You could just generate a new code. Codes expire. It's not like there's one nuclear code. It's because they don't have them. They do not have the nuclear codes. And this is an explanation for one of the reasons that they are pushing us towards the brink of nuclear war, because they're hoping that in the event of a standoff that they are going to get access to nuclear weapons. Because let's break this down for a second. I apologize if I don't do a perfect job with this, but this is how I've had it understood from 107. I think it's a very compelling argument. When we talk about continuity of government, when we talk about, what's the word I'm looking for? Devolution. The question is, what do you mean by devolution? Because there's positive devolution and there's negative devolution, right? There's positive continuity of government and there's negative. Positive, we could say, is powers being devolved further to states and localities and away from Washington, D.C. So you have kind of a hamstrung federal government that doesn't really have a lot of control or authority, and that you would have that kind of devolution in the event of, say, some WMD attack on the United States. The Capitol was unable to, respond, and so localities and other federal buildings elsewhere in the country would take, would take command authority. But the other kind of devolution or continuity of government is that it would go to senior executive service, which is really the deep state. So after World War II, when we developed the CIA and all the various intelligence agencies, senior executive service was also founded in the event to create some kind of continuity of government across administrations. And this is the deep state that became more and more powerful over time. These are unelected individuals who, many of whom you don't even know their names, and they have effectively limitless budget. They can bring on anybody they want, pay them whatever they want, and it's their own little crew, and they are behind the scenes of the politicians. And because they're connected to the intelligence agencies and maybe DARPA black budget projects, etc., they have enormous control and power because they have access to top secret information and to weaponry, etc., mind control stuff. So you have this, behind the scenes group that's designed to protect the government in the event of something happening to it. But actually what ends up happening is that group ends up controlling the government. And so when we talk about that we haven't really had a democracy in a long time, certainly like maybe since 9/11, we haven't had really a proper republic, and maybe even earlier than that. It's because this deep state group has gone at first from nudge a politician here or there to then kind of control a lot of the direction of both parties behind the scenes, to now being at the point where it's out in the open and they're making raids on the former president of the United States. They're acting with impunity out and overtly. And we know that Congress is almost impotent at this point. There's not even a question I mean, I guess there is among some normies still, but how it happens astounds me. That the vast majority of these politicians are not completely blackmailed and controlled, and the deep state senior executive service has done a lot of this. So you might ask yourself, well, why isn't the game over? Because in 1954, Eisenhower, and this is all in the 1954, very interesting year, with a lot of the alien stuff was going on in 54. If you get into the real esoterica, the Treaty of Giardia, this is when, you allegedly had the Greys and the Nordics, and they're competing, or, they're competing offers. But the point here is that the military became very concerned that the commander in chief could be compromised. So the commander in chief could be a Manchurian candidate. He could be blackmailed. Could be under mind control. And so they created their own continuity of government within the military. And so everyone says, well, if the president has the nuclear codes, he can, press his little buttons and off the nukes go. But that's not how it works. The generals in Ballistic Missile Command, Cheyenne Mountain, they have the final say. As Juan says, it's a handshake agreement. The president gives the commands, and the generals decide: is this command legitimate? Is the president compromised? Is the president operating in good faith? And then they decide whether to do it. You get a lot of buffoons who come into office, and the generals at Ballistic Missile Command are the most professional people in the planet, because they handle the big weapons. They are the ones that decide whether it launches. So, what you have right now is competing control over these two factions. And from what I understand, Ballistic Missile Command, they've got the goods. They've got the goods. These people are still loyal to President Trump. And, we just saw today on the McAfee channel, which is allegedly the continuation of Q. I don't know about that, but allegedly, dumping all sorts of information about Lockheed Martin, because there was a big hack. Allegedly, it was Russian hackers, but all this stuff was being posted on the McAfee channel. Now, I have no idea what that means one way or another, but the big implication here is that Lockheed Martin was involved in child porn and involved with, so I mean, they had all this high level, all these individuals who had top secret security clearance were involved with child porn. So this stuff is now being dumped out like crazy. So the alleged thing is that this is going to go to the brink of nuclear war, because it's at that point one of these two continuity of governments are going to figure out which really has control, which really has power. And from what I understand, it's going to be the White Hats in Cheyenne Mountain. So, where does that take us on the timeline here? We finally hit the point where the mask is off. We hit the Rubicon. We've crossed the Rubicon. And honestly, guys, how does it feel? I mean, I remember on the last show, I was just talking about how, and I was given the quote from Martin Geddes stuff about how we've been used to waiting for so long. It seems like the wait's over. I mean, this is not a drill. Things are going to happen really fast from here. And we're going to see Trump's arrest, I would say, no later than at some point in September. I would be shocked if it goes longer than that. I guess it could go to October, but it's going to be before the midterms. So here's the thing. Let's talk about that. So his arrest is going to be extremely galvanizing. I mean, the IRS agent stuff is galvanizing enough. I mean, I'm telling you, as a business owner, all this stuff is pretty wild. I'm glad I have all my records and everything. And but I think everybody who has a business is now like, you're going to get audited. and they're going to come to your house armed. It's it is truly a wild prospect, and my only hope is that maybe these events speed along fast enough that we don't have to deal with the consequences of that, because it's going to take some time for the wheels of the IRS stuff to get into motion. But yeah, this fall you're going to see Trump's arrest, and you're going to see the economic collapse start to really happen. Um, some bit of inside baseball I've heard about, um, is that within the mortgages in this country, so you remember in 2008, 2009, you had all these mortgages, and all these crappy subprime loans were um, were essentially bundled all up together, and so they were graded like they were high quality loans, but the reality was that there was all sorts of junk in there, and it just gets cut up and spliced and whatever, and then gets sold off, and so nobody knows what's even in the sausage anymore. And that was a big reason for the financial crisis, maybe the reason for the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. So I'm here to tell you that that is back worse than ever. And about, um, how do I put this? Let's just say there have been a lot of fake mortgages put into and sold off the banks, um, that banks were either not aware of or passed on themselves. So let's say 28 out of 30 mortgages in a package were real, but 2 were fake. And there's all sorts of ways that you can, and this is very complicated stuff, just don't quote me on it, I don't understand it. But essentially, I guess it has to do with derivatives. But you can basically package this stuff, cut it up, and generate some pretty crazy returns. And so, what I'm essentially trying to tell you is that the housing market in America is an illusion, and that there are millions of homes that don't even exist, that are on balance sheets as mortgages that should be paying. So, enough stress in the system, and this will come out, and the entire mortgage market's going to blow up. And we're going to get that stress in the system because it's continuing to go up. I mean, just very briefly on the war front, um, slow grinding movement in Donbass. As of a week ago, as of a week ago, um, well, let me just answer some of these questions here. You said everyone in cash. I don't want to sell stocks. I mean, there's no financial advice. No one can really tell you exactly what to do. I do expect the stock market to go significantly lower. So there's always that to consider. But you're in cash, you're going to be paying an inflation premium. The value of your cash is going to decline. But then maybe you have a buying opportunity, and it's liquid, it's safe. Uh, I just would not have more in your bank account than the FDIC limit, because I would not be surprised if some banks go under. Let's put it that way. So in Russia, I just want to say, as of a week ago, we started to get some reliable figures, casualty figures. And as of a week ago, we were looking at 191,000 Ukrainian casualties. 191,000. And that's about a 2-to-1 wounded to dead ratio. So looking at about 60,000 Ukrainian dead and about 130,000 wounded. Just astronomical numbers. Astronomical numbers. I mean, that is Vietnam. But Vietnam took place over, like, I don't know, 8 years. I mean, technically longer if you want to go back to Kennedy. But let's say 8 years of active operations. So brutal. And Russia and the DPR and the LPR combined is somewhere between 10 and 15,000 casualties, with about a 3-to-1 dead to wounded. Maybe it's also 2-to-1. So we can say that if we're going to be generous to the Ukrainians, we can say that between Russia, LPR, and DPR, they've had about 5,000 dead, which honestly is about right. I know people don't want to admit that stuff, that we're looking at 7-to-1 um, kind of ratios here, more than that even at this point. But Russia in particular has really not suffered much at all since the first phase of operations. First phase of operations, they definitely took casualties, but second phase, not so much. DPR and LPR have definitely taken the brunt of the casualties because people don't realize that in the entire Donbass, there are not Russian units on the front line, with the exceptions of, maybe some very specialized units like special forces. The Chechens were involved in Mariupol, but that's about it. Wagner PMC is that Russian military contractor. They're on the ground in the Donbass, but it's mostly, the LPR and the DPR militaries, which are under, I think pretty much full mobilization. Most of the men have joined up for the militia. The Russians are, of course, in Kharkov, and they're also in Kherson and Zaporozhye. So it's looking like there's going to be some offensive towards Kryvyi Rih, which is Zelensky's birthplace, and north of Nikolaev relatively soon. The Russians have broken into Bakhmut, and they've also broken into Marinka and the defenses on the outside of Donetsk. So Ukraine's just really getting pummeled at this point. I mean, they're shelling their own nuclear reactor to try to, I don't know. The one thing that the Russians did suffer, though, was, we don't know whether it was an accident or whether it was sabotage. It's actually one of the things that the Russians have lied about, because they said, oh, nothing really happened. But it looks like the Russians lost about 10 planes in Crimea, and we don't know what exactly that is. Mantega, Respecter, I don't know how you don't think that Russia isn't winning at all. I hear this stuff and I'm like, just explain how they're not winning. Explain how a 9-to-1 kill ratio, and making all of Europe and the United States fall into a depression, Europe in particular freezing for the winter. I don't, and them being able to withstand complete sanctions with, really only moderate in temporary inflation for a couple of random consumer products, how that means that they're losing the war. I mean, they are 100% winning the war, and the entire world knows they're winning the war. And the question is, and everyone wants them to go faster because they're used to American shock and awe, but Russia's actually deliberately not trying to destroy infrastructure. I mean, obviously infrastructure is being destroyed, but they're not trying to destroy it because they will have to assume the cost of rebuilding Ukraine. But I think in the long term, it pays off. People might disagree about that point, but you're talking also about geopolitical interest and historical interest and whatever. The one thing I want to talk about when it comes to Russia, though, is not really Russia so much as is Ukraine and Poland. I meant to mention this on the last one. So apparently Ukraine has granted Poles essentially full rights as Ukrainians for 1.5 years. You don't have to do anything. You just go and ask for the right to be able to go to Ukraine, and you get full rights, including the right to get drafted and sent to the Donbass, probably. But you get full rights to all benefits, which of course are being just paid by Western governments. But the point of this stuff is that that's pretty interesting, because that's basically giving Poles citizenship as Ukrainians, just as Ukrainians have been getting fast-tracked citizenship and benefits in Poland. Meanwhile, you have Polish companies buying up all the land in Western Ukraine, particularly the agricultural land, whatever industries there. There's actually been some big protest in Poland because these companies have been buying Ukrainian grain which can't get out the port at like 20% on what it should be worth. And so it's, obviously screwing Polish farmers. But the point here is that they have, the point here is that they have now, um, it looks like they're trying to gain complete control over Ukraine and that they're gaining equal rights in Ukraine. So what I would say this indicates, and we have Medvedev putting out this map, this joke map of Ukraine being just Kiev and Russia controlling the rest of it except for the West where Poland controls it, with maybe Hungary and Romania taking a few bits. So when you look at all this stuff, you can't help but think, are they, when they're obviously preparing for Ukraine to lose. I mean, they can't mount a counteroffensive anywhere. And so what happens? So Russia takes Odessa, and then as it moves towards Kiev, do they declare um, Polish-Ukrainian Union? And that's a way to protect Western Ukraine, at least, from being able to get annexed by Russia or taken under control of Russia. And that they can say that because that country is now merged in with Poland, they're protected under Article 5. Honestly, I don't think that's going to fly. I don't think Russia's going to honor that. And you may have that may be a big escalation point in the war. So you got to watch out for that. That's another big escalation point. We talked about China last time. Um, you know, that is essentially what is going to be. I mean, this is a rare window for China to be able to make a move. I know some people think it's going to happen at the end of the decade, but you have an economic crisis about to hit China, and they had just been humiliated. The regime's legitimacy is based on the fact that they haven't been humiliated by Western powers, and that Taiwan is part of China, and that they're going to achieve the reunification. So when I look at this stuff, I think, if you're China, would you really wait? Especially if you probably have some intelligence. You may not know exactly what's going on, but I guarantee if you and I know that Ballistic Missile Command has not signed off on Biden, I bet that China and Russia, I mean, Russia certainly would know, and China might pass it on to China, that there's some kind of struggle for power going on in the United States. So you have a leadership crisis in the US, I mean, you're just never going to get an opportunity. If you think, is it possible that in 1 year Trump's going to be back in office, then they know that they're never going to be able to achieve reunification in the same way. They're never going to be able, so I just think to myself, this is their opportunity. And just like when Russia invaded Ukraine, it's like they were faced with, Ukraine was about to mount a massive offensive against the Donbass, and they knew basically, like, if they don't do anything, if they don't make a move, then they're gonna lose the position. And I think it's the same for China. They're being pushed into positions where they're gonna just essentially have to go to war, or they're gonna have to suffer some sort of regime decline, collapse. So we're going to have all that stuff happening. And if there's war with China, and even if it doesn't go into a hot war and it's just an economic blockade of Taiwan, Taiwan is the only country that makes, for export to other companies, high-end microchips. So Samsung in South Korea also makes high-end microchips, but for Samsung, if you want to get them for other companies, you can only get them through Taiwan. And so if China enacts an economic blockade of Taiwan, which it's perfectly capable of doing, then that's going to also screw over the Western industry. I don't know, guys. I just see it all coming to a head. It's all coming to a head. It's all coming to a head right fucking now. And so now let's get into the election related stuff. Okay? So you have all this stuff occurring, and then you have the midterms. Now, we've talked about, are they going to steal the midterms? Of course they're going to steal the midterms. You saw what happened in the primaries. But at this point, people are so enraged and they're so focused. They're so focused on the enemy, so to speak. They're so focused on the cheating that they can't cheat to the same extent that they could before, because people are watching them everywhere. Drop boxes, people are going to watch them everywhere. And so it's kind of like there's too many eyes on them. They only work in secret. We had a lot of eyes on them in 2020, and now in 2022, you have like triple, quadruple number of people paying attention to what's going on with the elections. Every single time they steal, they get caught, and then it's like all these lawsuits, and so what they may decide to do is cancel the elections or indefinitely postpone them because of maybe a war situation, a new pandemic outbreak with monkeypox. Maybe you start to see some really serious health effects for people this fall. And by the way, why wouldn't you? Because if you've seen the health data, you know that cancer rates and everything are going up, up, up. So we are going to start to see a lot worse as we get into the low vitamin D seasons this year. Far, far worse than we did last year is my prediction. And so with all this stuff coming on top of one after another, one after another, one after another, you're going to have the removal of Biden, whether he dies or is removed. And then is it going to be Harris, or is Harris not going to be able to get in there? Is it going to be Pelosi instead? What's going to happen with these things? If their best move, and especially for SES and the deep state people, may be to cancel the midterm elections. And at that point, it's my suspicion that we may be gaining a territory where the military, where ballistic missile command feels like they can take action. Because at that point, everything that's been going on, it's bad. It's very bad. And it's treasonous. But canceling the midterms and trying to hold on to power, that's just in your face. You arrest the opposition, the former president and leader of the opposition. They'll probably plant evidence on him. And by the way, they'll say that because he's been arrested and convicted, because they'll try him in D.C. and he'll get convicted, and then they'll say that he can't run anymore. And of course, that's not true because the Constitution doesn't bar people from running based on criminal record, and the Constitution is the only document that matters. But they'll say it matters because there's this old bill that they passed. So you can just see it all coming to a head. I feel like we have massive ramp up in intensity these next 3 months, and I think it's probably going to be late November that we may get the storm. We may get the storm. It's coming. It's coming. As Alan says here, they're going to arrest Trump and several key supporters, and some will be key candidates and office holders. Yeah, they're going to start arresting the opposition. And at that point, it's going to be all out in the open. And honestly, if at that point there's no action, then we've all been fooled. I think I don't like to make these kind of statements, but if we don't see any kind of action by next spring, I think it's maybe safe to say that we've been fooled. Because if they're literally able to arrest everybody and nothing happens, and they just continue to consolidate power, the country would go to civil war in that case. And that would defeat the purpose of everything that we've waited for at this point. So I'm trusting the plan because look, if you get into like wild crap, if you go into some of the really big Q rabbit hole stuff, I get why people don't agree with that stuff. I get it. JFK Jr. is alive and, whatever, all this kind of crazy nonsense. But we're just speaking about this on a very simplistic level, which is that Q is a military intelligence operation to inform the public of the fact that they were going to make a move at the deep state when the time was right. And they could have made it earlier, but the longer waiting all the way up to this final point gets the maximum number of people in the country awake. Maximum number of the people in the country awake. So yeah, let's talk about that. I couldn't think that FBI arrests Trump without Republicans breaking a lot of windows. Yeah, I think for sure that happens. Although, you know, look, I want to say that you obviously don't want to do that stuff. That violence feeds into their hands, because it does. I mean, non-violence is the way out of this, and frankly, we don't need to engage in any violence. If, let's say, there is no military to do anything, and it's just us, all that would have to happen is that all the American people would just do sit-ins across the entire country. If they did sit-ins across the entire country, then it would collapse because they wouldn't have the manpower to enforce anything whatsoever. That's what happened in the fall of communism. They just had to give up. Yeah, I mean, look at, you had a shooter going against the FBI like the day afterwards. I mean, it's just so predictable. It's so predictable. Now they're using all that as a pretext to be able to, eliminate the First Amendment and go after people. Like, that's what they're going to do. They're just going to, it's like, oh, any threats against the FBI now, like, well, this is a terroristic threat, so therefore you don't have First Amendment rights anymore. I mean, and that's what's happening all across the board here. Like, look at the Alex Jones trial. Alex Jones was not allowed to present any evidence in his own defense. The judge wouldn't allow him to bring in evidence in his own defense. And the verdict is like insane. I mean, $40 million so far, and then they're saying different lawsuits for emotional distress. Emotional distress. I mean, it's so beyond insane, but the whole point of it, of course, the judge herself said this, is that, you know, that the purpose was that he would never be able to go back on television again, that his show would be done for good, that he would be silenced for good. I mean, like, but I look at the newspapers and I still don't see it breaking out enough in the open. I still see very, like, oh, FBI, was looking for this thing for Trump, making it seem like very neutral, or even that maybe Trump had done something wrong. So we're not there yet with the media, that's for sure. But guys, yeah, it's about to get really crazy, and yeah, we have no choice but to trust the plan. No choice but to trust the plan. But I do trust the plan. I do trust the plan, and um, actually, that'll lead me to the last topic to discuss before we get into a few questions. You asked me, "Hey, do the Proud Boys still exist?" I presume so. I really have no idea about the Proud Boys. I've never even interacted with anybody in the Proud Boys, so I don't know about that organization. But I'm sure they do, although maybe they're not active at this point because they probably feel like the feds are all over them. They don't trust each other because of the Fed infiltration, would be my guess. Um, so, as a result of all this stuff with Trump, there's a lot of stuff going around again about Trump being the Antichrist, and uh, that this is just, this is all in preparation to make Trump as a victim, and blah blah blah. So I want to just talk about this real quickly. We've touched on this stuff before. I will reiterate. I accept the possibility of the fact that Trump and, all these Patriot accounts or whatever, that, they're really all cabal, DeSantis, Skull and Bones, and that it's really just they're, we're being made to look at Trump as a savior so that we'll defend Trump no matter what happens, and we'll all worship Trump. And my response to that is simple. If so, first off, what does that change? What are you going to do about it? Whenever I see these accounts who talk about, like, Trump being Antichrist, and that all the people fighting against the cabal are in on it, they're just, trying to change sides, and they're going to collapse one half of themselves and keep the other half up. Now, let's be honest, we know that they've done this stuff in the past, but I think what people don't understand is that they use fall guys and they pivot a little bit on messaging. But in the past, it's not been like the good guys who are trying to get rid of all of them are in on it with them. You know, Eisenhower wasn't in on it with them. The church committee wasn't in on it with him. Those were awakened backlashes in the deep state after doing 4 assassinations in the 1960s, then took a big L and then went undercover, regrouped, reinfiltrated. That's what they do. They'll say, "Oh, Fauci's bad," and then but they protect their primary investment by using fall guys. So, when I hear this stuff, I'm like, it doesn't really jive with what you see in reality. But here's the big thing: it's cynical. So the energy of it is, whenever I see people post this stuff, it's like, what does any of it matter? It doesn't matter. It's like, yeah, it fucking matters. Actually, you know what? It fucking matters. Okay? When you have a bunch of communists who are taking over the country and who are starting wars around the world, stopping them fucking matters. Okay? It's not some, like, and what happens is that people get so far up, they start to see the patterns, they start to get a glimpse of God's plan. They get a glimpse of how events unfold. And because they can start to see the patterns, they assume that another man is behind all those patterns completely. And that it's all a setup against us. Which I think is just, maybe it's a stage of awakening for some people because they can, but the issue is that, how do I put this? It's almost as if they become atheistic in a certain sense, that there is no way of being saved except, but then they go into the savior complex, which is that, well, all the people who see this, they're just going to get beamed off and taken off world or whatever, or which is super savior complex unto itself. Whereas, what is all this about? This is saying, is it possible that the white hats had a plan and that they were going to use the black hats' energy against them? Yeah. And that's how the battle between dark and light has always looked. It doesn't mean that light is controlled and evil. It means simply that they understand each other on a certain level and they battle. And we're at the point now where dark is maybe being eliminated. There is going to be false awakening. There are going to be a lot of double bluffs where the deep state will throw away a lot of their own. And I think that this is maybe happening right now with perhaps the Wall Street, Musk, Bezos people throwing Davos under the bus, hoping that they can continue their stuff into the new world and just awe us with new tech that we're going to go into it. I'm not naive to all this stuff going on, but just because Trump and the white hats decided that, well, okay, they're going to make this move, so rather than attack them head on, let's let them make it, and then let's let them overextend. Let's use Trump as bait, and then once they go after him, they'll have overextended themselves so much that they'll have lost their own base. They'll have lost all legitimacy. Like, just because Trump and the white hats could see that would be a good plan doesn't mean that they're in on it. I mean, seriously, read body language. You can't look at these people around each other and think that these people are working together. They absolutely despise each other. They despise each other. So I just, people say, well, they're just designed to have us enter into this new age where, people are going to just, like, it's all a trap, that they just try to feed new age stuff into us. I'm like, well, look, people's consciousness is expanding. People's consciousness is expanding. And if, and I don't think anybody here is looking at Trump as the savior that we just have to listen to anything that Trump said. Most of us on this program didn't get the vax, and Trump made comments about that. We are, as you said, Alan, we are being prepared to become the ones we've been waiting for. And we've had to go through this initiation process. We've had to get to the point and say that, okay, we're not going to take this. We're not going to consent to it. And, okay, we're getting some help as a result. But the White Hats couldn't make their move if they didn't have the backing of the public to make the move. So when I see here, those glasses make me feel like the streamer might take us on a Fear and Loathing ride through the desert. Yeah, I might do it. I might do it. Let me go. Oh, there's a comment I wanted to go back to here. What do you think will be the role of the Patriots people who are awake in the coming months? The role of the Patriots and people will be to keep the rest of the people calm. That's what it'll be. Keep people calm and, get people prepared for the hard times that are going to come. When this storm hits, and it's going to hit all throughout fall, winter, I mean, we get Pluto in Aquarius in spring, in March 2023. I think maybe that's going to be when they seat the new Congress, if there's a delayed elections or whatever. Who knows? It's really impossible to say what's going to happen. But this is going to be a really great spring. It's going to be a really great spring. But the fight's not going to be over. Pluto doesn't leave Capricorn for good, because it kind of goes in and out until, I believe, November 2024. So I think you can say that the cabal may last all the way till then. But we are going to see, after this storm, this pivot point, we're going to see them on the back foot. What I expect to see is that they're going to be hiding more in the shadows. There's going to be more, they're going to have certain areas of control. There's going to be terror in those areas. There's going to be people trying to put down the terror. There's going to be perhaps like terror attacks as they start to get caught out in the open and arrested or whatever. I actually think, this has been on my mind, I think that this is where we start to see, as we get into 2023 and 2024, that's when we start to get more of the alien stuff, because that's when they'll try to get people to go along with them, to work with them by throwing the aliens to scare people so people don't trust. I don't know exactly how they'll put it together, but I see that's when they start to throw the alien stuff out there, because it's like, don't pay attention to what's going on Earth. Look at what's, we have to rally together against these aliens, blah, blah. Who knows how they're going to pull it off. But that's when I think you get Blue Beam. But our job is to keep people calm and, honestly, stay out of the way. Just stay out of the way. Because if things start to get hot, I do not recommend anybody get into any violence. Don't get in any situations. Stay close to loved ones. And, be prepared for a little self-quarantine. Especially if you're one of the big cities. I mean, a lot of these big blue cities, because, I'm going to say this again, there aren't really blue states, but there are blue cities. Especially at this point, I would say New Jersey, New York, there's no question that we're over 50% red here. But if you go into the city itself, it's different stories, okay? Red states are blood red. Now, blue states are red, or at least purple. But the cities, still blue. That's where the danger is going to be. And who knows what kind of outbreaks and stuff are also going to occur. So you're just going to want to stay safe and stick with loved ones and keep your head down. Don't get into trouble. Don't get into trouble like me, okay? I don't want any of you guys to get into trouble. DeSantis, The question, what has DeSantis done that would suggest he's a black hat? Nothing. But he was Skull and Bones, and we know what Skull and Bones is. I'll also say this. It's possible, because remember, their plan with the United States was never to take it out outright because they could never do it. It's just too big. It's too diverse. Um, there are too many people with guns. There's no way that they could fully take over the U.S. There's just too many levels of decentralization and protections. So the only thing that they could do is get the United States to fight itself so that then in the process America would be destroyed, and moreover they'd be able to enter into the chaos and control things afterwards, just like they did in Russia. But Russia was in a much more fragile state during the Russian Revolution. So the only thing I could see is that DeSantis's role would be to provoke a civil war. So he would be the one who starts to say that the states are not going to go along with the federal government. Florida is going to arrest federal agents in the state, and that this begins to provoke a civil war. That's the only thing I could see that he's been prepped for. And so that they arrest Trump, and then DeSantis runs for president. He wins automatically because Trump can't be president. And then DeSantis basically pulls half the country into a civil war to fight against them. That would be the sleeper move that I could see DeSantis having. But look, he hasn't done anything wrong at all right now. And that's assuming certain intentions which have not been verified. I mean, everything he said sounds pretty good to me so far. He hasn't called for any violence. So it's all speculative. Do you think there's any chance of avoiding the timeline outlined in the Book of Revelation, or are we guaranteed to see the Antichrist? I've said this before on shows a long time ago, but I don't believe that we're in the Revelation timeline. I think the Revelation timeline is the CABAL timeline. Like, I think it's the CABAL timeline. I don't, and that's why I don't, when I hear all these people talk about how Trump's the Antichrist, look, I think it's they make salient points in terms of the esoterical stuff, and I'm not saying dismiss it out of hand. I'm not saying, but I will just say that it seems to me that they are really fixated on the Revelation timeline, and they're not even really keeping much of an open mind about it at this point. They want to believe that the good guys are bad. And that's just like I see this with red pill guys with women. I mean, just like all women are bad. It's like, that means all leaders are bad. Anybody who gets in any position of influence is bad. I just don't believe that. I don't believe it. People are complicated. You know, I don't see the Book of Revelation playing out. The energy doesn't match it. There's not enough fear. There's a lot of fear in the air, sure, but there's not this many awakened people in those situations. Trump didn't deliver the first time around his promises. Why would he this time? Well, the question is, why didn't he deliver on the promises? And you have different theories. You could say that, he had, when he came in as president, first off, he was hamstrung by the Russiagate stuff from the very beginning. Second off, you could say that he had bad personnel, but he was also constrained because you're only allowed to bring on certain people. There's only certain people who are qualified for the position. It's like, I don't think any of us know how difficult it was actually in there. Enemies all around you. There's still a lot of speculation that Jared Kushner betrayed him. And I haven't seen them together, so very possible. This, and the public wasn't awake enough for it yet. They weren't awake enough. There was just a small number of the Trump supporters really got what was going on in WikiLeaks. This time around, it's a different story. The public is ready for full-on clean house. And there's also tactical considerations. Did he not go and clean house because he was allowing them to overextend. I don't want to go too far with that because I do think that he made mistakes, right? People make mistakes, but I don't think there were any critical mistakes made. All right, let's see here. I do think Blue Beam's still there. I mean, we haven't seen anything with the aliens yet. Some people were predicting it this summer, but I was like, we're nowhere close to that. They're going to start bringing out all the weird shit after the storm because that's going to distract people and get people all confused and freaked out. Hey Pat, what do you think about building bigger families and creating something like a clan instead of trust government, police, patriots, better trust in your family? 100%. A lot of people are actually building, getting big parcels of land and making like compounds. So a bunch of different houses on there for close friends, family, and they're creating little communities. I actually think it's going to be, I think it's going to be a big feature of the next 20 to 30 years. Is a lot of small scale, self selected communal living, picking locations, investing in it, multiple families, extended families, all going together. And I'm sure it's how it was in the past. Yeah. So that's actually interesting to hear. My liberal friends are already calling for the arrest of all politicians, lol. Yeah, and this is the thing. Okay, we do have some really good guys on the right, but like how many really? I mean, the whole Democratic Party is compromised, and 75, half, 50% to 75% of the Republican Party compromised. I mean, it depends how compromised. Like you have maybe only 20% is as compromised as the Democrats, but then you have only maybe 10% isn't compromised at all. So anyway, I think that's probably a wrap, guys, for tonight. The point is that we've now crossed the Rubicon. Get your popcorn. We're going to have quite the show these coming months. Really stay safe. We're going to be in touch a lot more. Good news for you guys. I mean, I think that we can start to expect. I wouldn't be surprised. We're going to be. I don't know if I can do these more than once a week, unless some really crazy shit happens. But I think we're going to be doing these probably once a week for the foreseeable future. So we'll see. Once a week, twice a week. We'll see how it goes. There'll be some lulls, but this is, maybe a good time. If you don't have great memories, this is maybe a good time. Last piece of advice is maybe like keep some kind of journal. Like for me, these shows are kind of like a journal that I'll be able to reflect on in the past because they go through all the various stuff, the changing of moods, the changing of energies. But I think you're all gonna be really interested to look back at these times. I mean, I just keep thinking so much how much we've changed over the last coming on 2.5 years. So anyway, guys, I love you all. Have a great weekend. I'll see you next time.